Okay, good afternoon everyone, and thanks for the invitation to talk to you today. A couple of the speakers this morning have touched on the idea of biodiversity monitoring on campuses. And we've talked a lot about universities' environmental plans, and this kind of interpretation board is not uncommon on university campuses. I'm not picking on Warwick specifically. I just happened to be there for an open day. My son was thinking about going there. He didn't. He went to Lancaster, as it happened. Lots of information about things like energy efficiency, carbon management. You'd struggle to find anything about biodiversity in there, except for a little patch of woodland there. And I think Michelle, in the first talk, talked about it as biodiversity as being the forgotten issue within environmental sustainability on university campuses, and I think she's absolutely right. You turn 90 degrees though, and there's bags of biodiversity on Warwick's campuses, as there is in many campuses, including some of our urban campuses. But we're not really making the most of it. We're not talking about, we're not developing anything about monitoring, enhancing, and so on. And there's one very good underlying reason for this. Universities traditionally have engaged with environmental issues such as water and energy efficiency, waste management, and so on, because if we think about our impact of our environmental impact over time, if we can reduce our impact in these areas, we can save money. There's a financial gain for those universities and colleges. And nationally, of course, that scales up as well. Biodiversity is rather different, though. If we invest in biodiversity enhancements and monitoring on our campuses, at the very best, it's going to be budget neutral, though as a few people suggested this morning, actually it's going to cost the university money. They've got to put individuals in place, they've got to pay for monitoring, habitat management, and so on. What does that mean at a national level? Well, many of you will be aware of the UK National Ecosystem Assessment, which reported in 2011 and talked about the financial value of natural capital and ecosystem services. Described things like supporting services and provisioning and regulating and cultural services and so on. Things like water quality, flood control, carbon storage, pollination as well, of course. And at a national level, it's worth a lot of money. Conservative estimates, about £30 billion per year. Some examples there. Wetlands enhancing water quality, £1.5 billion. Health benefits up to £300 per person per year. Wild pollinators, 430 million, which is an extreme underestimate, actually, because it doesn't include what it would cost farmers to go around with a little paintbrush and hand pollinate those crops. Sounds crazy, but it's happening in some parts of the world. You won't see this accounted for in Mr. Osborne's recent budget. It's part of that broad kind of natural capital that we sort of take for granted, but it is a real financial underpinning to our national economy. I'd argue then that although it may cost organisations money, excuse me, sorry, something catching my throat here, although it may cost organisations money to enhance and monitor biodiversity, in fact, at a national level, perhaps as an organisation, we've got a societal obligation, a duty to conserve that biodiversity. Lots of universities and colleges have biodiversity action plans. Lots of us try to enhance biodiversity on our campuses, but relatively few actually monitor the impact of activities or monitor how that biodiversity is changing over time. We've heard some very good examples this morning, a couple of really good case studies of how that's starting to be done, but it's a relatively recent phenomenon. So as a case study, I want to talk about University of Northampton's new waterside campus. At the moment we're on 2 campuses. The idea is to merge onto a single campus, which we're calling Waterside, because it's close to the river, as you'll see in a moment. It's a £330 million project. The whole site's 22 hectares, and we're due to open in spring 2018. 2 questions then. How is that large peri-urban site going to impact on the local biodiversity on the site? Can we design the campus to minimise impacts on biodiversity or even enhance it? This is the site. If you know Northampton, it's the River Nen running down here. It's the site of the former power station here on this side. This side is where the Avon factory, that's Avon's UK headquarters, it's where Avon used to make all of its cosmetics before it went over to Eastern Europe. There's a national and an international context for this. There's our campus here. We've got a local nature reserve right next door, Barnes Meadows, a wildlife trust reserve. But actually further up the Nen Valley, we've got a whole series of gravel pits and wetlands which have SPA status, European level designation, and their Ramsar sites as well, United Nations designation as well, going all the way up towards Peterborough. So the campus has a local and a national context for biodiversity, and those sites are designated based on the overwintering birds on those sites, particularly wildfowl. Before the project started, there was an environmental impact assessment on the site done by Vet Ecology, which recorded 54 bird species, a series of mammals, plants, invertebrates, including butterflies and bees. And early on in this process, myself and colleague Janet Jackson started to talk with the landscape architects who are EAUC and brought in the Wildlife Trust to negotiate some habitat creation on the site, and negotiated about half the site to be turned over to habitat creation, including things like wildflower meadows, tree planting, some reed bed, and recreated brownfield as well. Some of the existing brownfield we're actually going to skim off, lift up and put it on as brown roofs and distribute it around the site. The question is, how are we going to know that it's been successful? How are we going to know that what we've put in place as recreated habitat has actually had the success that we're hoping for? The answer is environmental monitoring, biodiversity monitoring, and at this stage we're focusing on birds, because as you'll be aware, birds signifies a broader environmental change. They're also relatively easy to survey compared to many other groups of organisms. We'd love to be able to survey the bees, but apart from a few representative species, actually they're quite a tricky group to survey. But at the end of the project we will be doing some bee surveys. But we're going to focus on the birds. So this is the timeline for monitoring and campus construction. We've got our baseline winter bird surveys, 2012, 2013. We've got baseline spring surveys in 2013. There was nothing done in 2014, and then 2014-15, We went in with some of our students, a couple of our students who are co-authors on this talk, resurveyed the winter birds, did the same thing in spring. We've just completed our third set of winter surveys. In the next month or two, we'll be doing the third spring surveys again. And in relation to the work that's going on, remediation work started early 2014. Construction work has just started. Groundwork has just started. Construction work is due to end in 2018. I've put a question mark there. Clearly we want to monitor up to 2018, but also beyond as well. This is the data for the baseline survey 2012-13 for the winter birds. 38 species identified. Divided them into the standard RSPB, green, amber and red status there, depending on their conservation status. This is what happened in our first resurvey, 2015-26. Sorry, that should be 2015-16 at the end there. That should be 2014-16. That's the wrong way around, so apologies for that. In our first resurvey, we re-recorded 81% of the green status birds, about 35% of the amber and red status birds, and added 3 new species there. In the most recent survey, we're still re-recording 81%, 53% of the amber and red status, and 1 new species there. The spring breeding bird surveys, we identified 39 species, re-recorded 92% of the green status birds, 57% of the red and amber. In the next month or two, we'll have more data to report on that. 6 new species on there. So this is the current situation. This is where we are at the moment. In black there we've got our baseline survey. In blue I've got the gains, numbers of species we've gained each survey. Green is the losses of green status birds. In red there's the combined losses of red and amber status birds. You see it's the red and amber status birds, the ones that are of most conservation concern, which we've lost the most, but it seems to be levelling off and potentially even reducing those losses slightly. Green seem to have levelled off as well. We won't know the full impact of construction and then the habitat enhancements that we're putting into place until 2018 and beyond. And hopefully at that time I'll be able to come back and report back to you on that. What are we going to conclude from this then? This kind of long-term monitoring from large infrastructure projects is actually very rarely done. Even for birds, even for a relatively well-known group of organisms called such as birds, it's very rarely done. The baseline surveys are often done by consultants, and then that's it. Nothing's done with that information. And one of the reasons is there's no statutory requirement. Two of the co-authors on this paper then are Joe and Charlie, are students, final year students. We're going to get more students involved with them. Great opportunities for research, student learning, and this kind of work. I'd argue that as universities and colleges, we have a societal role, perhaps even an obligation, to manage and to monitor biodiversity on our campuses. If we can't do it as academic organisations, we can't expect other kinds of businesses, large organisations to do it. We have to take the lead on that. And then the final thing is a plug for the Biodiversity Index. If Tim's Phase 1 Habitat Survey app is the first floor of habitat surveying, the Biodiversity Index is kind of ground floor. maybe even basement. It doesn't require anywhere near as much expertise as is required for a phase 1 habitat survey. It's also free for colleges and universities. I'm not trying to undercut Tim's financial model, but it was HEFCE funded, and it's been out there for a few years now. We've got quite a few universities working with it. If you want any more information, there's some flyers and there's an article there as well about it, and I can happily answer any questions. It's trying to do a rather different thing to the phase 1 habitat surveys. Final thanks to Joe and Charles, who did the work with us, and various organisations who were involved in it, and a plug for my blog, which is focused very much on biodiversity, and which I'll be reporting the data on the winter and spring surveys as they come in over the next few years. Thanks for listening. I'd be very happy to answer any questions.